There we go.
There we go. All right. So I will go ahead. It's 8:31 and call the meeting to order. First order of business is you all should have received the minutes from the last meeting in your email probably last week. So I'll take a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
All right.
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. Next up, I will kind of provide an update on the program. There's been a lot happening in the cannabis space generally, and certainly you're probably reading about some of that, but some of it also impacts the medical program. So I want to be sure to highlight those features of it. So first, the medical program does remain strong. We are seeing a slight decline, although a plateauing of patients. We have over 51,000 patients. But considering Grow Your Own and now for, in the impending adult use program launching, that's still a large number of patients. We have 1,575 certifying practitioners, which will now include physician assistants that was recently passed. So those are also among those who can certify. Kind of another big legislative change that happened is starting next July. So July of 2023 is the $100 fee for patients to register with the program will be eliminated. So that's something I know people have been interested in seeing. So that's happening next July.
That's the annual fee also, Commissioner?
Yeah, so that's the annual registration fee. Obviously, to the extent doctors charge a fee for the doctor visit or any of that piece, that's not within our control, but the one they pay to the department, yeah, will be eliminated next year, and that was part of legislation that just passed. In addition, with the prescription monitoring program now being updated pretty much in real time, we no longer require patients to give us advance notice and approval to change dispensaries. So that process has been simplified, I think, significantly for patients. So that was another good change. We did, and this sort of was discussed a little bit at the last meeting, we did update and clarify our regulations with regard to lab testing, and really in particular with a focus on making sure there's no detection of aspergillus, which we're hearing from microbiologists is really a particular concern, particularly for patients inhaling the product. On the research end, we obviously have our presentation. We don't have other updates in that end, but certainly we'll look forward to the presentation that's happening after my update. In terms of the adult use market, that's opening probably as early as later this year. So that's kind of moving apace. So you all will continue to probably hear news or see headlines or have people say things to you about that as developments occur throughout the summer and fall. And we took a lot of the lessons we learned in our medical program and have grafted those on to the adult use program. So a lot of the stuff we looked at in terms of securing product, of packaging, a lot of those features we're going to continue to have to be the same. In addition, there will be hybrid retailers. So these are ones who could sell to patients or just adult consumers, and they will continue to have the pharmacist. So we're going to actually, through that, end up with more locations patients can go through to meet with a pharmacist and to get medication. In terms of the medical businesses, so all of them in the law have an opportunity to convert. We anticipate most will. There may be with some of the dispensary zoning challenges. So we'll see how that plays out in the coming months. But as important part of the conversion, we will be evaluating their plans on how they intend to protect the medical program and the patients in it. So things we'll look for, how are they going to manage the traffic flow so that patients can get in and out without too much difficulty. Their plans to prevent supply shortages. Delivery is now available and may become a more attractive option. So it's available now. Dispensaries can do it. Not too many have started doing that. I believe one with a couple of locations has started. So that's a new sort of feature for patients. Other things we're going to look for are kind of appropriate staffing in terms of having a reasonable number of pharmacists and pharmacy techs on staff. And then we'll be looking at things such as their commitment to compassionate care, research, substance abuse prevention, making sure they continue to have a private consultation area for patients. So as the conversion happens, we're going to be taking a look at these things, and before we approve somebody to switch over, we want to make sure they have a thoughtful approach to preservation. In connection with the adult use, we are kind of a number of things are launching that I think will benefit the medical program. One, as I mentioned, is delivery, which just creates another option for patients to get their product. Also, there'll be a seed to sale tracking system, which will give us a more robust way of kind of monitoring product throughout the supply chain. Because one feature of the adult use program, it is creating a broader supply chain. There was an interest in creating more business opportunities. So right now you have the producers and the dispensary facilities, and it's really just those two. With adult use, there will be, in addition to, well, we call them cultivators, but growers, you'll have packagers, you'll have companies that can do just food or product manufacturing. There's going to be services only for delivery, only for transporting. So there's going to be a number of different ones. And so seed to sale tracking will help with that. We'll also be licensing hybrid retailers, as I mentioned. So that's a whole new license category. So you'll have, when the program is fully in place, you'll have dispensary facilities to the extent some don't convert. Then you'll have the hybrid, which will serve both the medical and the adult market, and you'll have retailers who will only be serving non-medical consumers. So I'll give you a little bit of an update on the adult use program. Just, you're going to be hearing a lot about it, just to kind of give you some context as to how that's organized. So one important piece, and I think I talked about it at last meeting, is there's a lot throughout the law to ensure there's some social equity in the cannabis marketplace. And so in conjunction with that, the law created a social equity council. It's a 15-member council. DCP is one of those 15 members. It's my deputy commissioner, Andrea Comer, sort of serves as my designee, and she chairs the council. But there are 14 other members on it. They come, some are legislative or governor appointees, some by virtue of their position. So a few other agencies, for example, also have a seat at the table. That council then has the ability to hire, and there's an executive director that oversees the Office of Social Equity, who herself is now hiring and has hired and is continuing to hire staff to manage that part of the program. And so the Social Equity Council has an important piece up front, because there's an expectation that there's several pathways. Let me step back to get a license into this market. So one, there was a separate licensing period for just social equity applicants who want to open a cultivation facility, and they'll have to open it in a disproportionately impacted area. And then there's a lottery process for all the other license types that I was mentioning, the retailers, the manufacturers, et cetera. And 50% of the people selected through those lottery process will need to be social equity applicants. And so the council has an important job in the Office of Social Equity of reviewing those applications and confirming that they truly are social equity applicants. And it's not just an honor system of checking a box. There's a review that takes place over with the Social Equity Council. And so once they have confirmed that, they will refer license applications over to us. And so, you've probably heard in the news recently about 16 cultivators that were referred to us by the Social Equity Council. And now we begin our process of doing background checks and ultimately working with those applicants as they move through the process to get a final license. So that will include things they need to get a location, get the zoning approval, establish their businesses, and we'll make sure they're, meeting all the requirements of our regs for that business. So that's sort of how the flow happens. And over time, so the lottery application periods have closed. So over coming months, you'll start hearing about the Social Equity Council referring lottery applicants over to us for certain categories, and those moving through the process as well. Some of the medical businesses may start to convert, and if they've done what they need to do on that end, that may be happening as well. So over the summer and fall, you'll start hearing about a lot of those. There's also a category for equity joint ventures, and that's where a medical business could partner with a social equity applicant and form a business. So there may be some of those moving through as well. So anyhow, that's sort of what's happening. You're seeing the beginning of those application flows or hearing about them, but over the, I think, summer and fall, you'll probably continue to hear about that. That more or less concludes my update, but I'm happy to answer questions before we move on to our kind of special presentation.
So,
yes.
Commissioner, two questions. What have other states seen regarding medical patients when legal adult marijuana is added as far as numbers go? Does it plateau? Does it go down? And the second question is just what's the time from now to get your first card? How long is that process taking once a patient is put into the system?
So in terms, I'll probably defer to Roger Zaviel on your first question. It's taking within probably about 3 to 5 business days, I believe, from when, so if you're certified by the doctor, as many of you know, then the patient gets their email saying register with us. So assuming they complete their registration process correctly, get us what we need, usually within that time frame. As to patients in other states, some of it's hard to know. You have a lot of states where their medical program and their was so open-ended that it was very similar. But I don't know if Rod or Zaviel, if you have more details on what we're seeing with medical patient numbers in those states.
Yeah, it really depends on how the state structured it and what efforts they put to preserve that plan, and really what was the basis of their original medical program. And did they even maintain any of those same standards? I think we try to be thoughtful about it as we crafted language.
So would it be fair to say that, if anything, there's no increase in the medical program in states that have approved both medical and recreational?
It's hard to say that kind of across the board, because we're not comparing apples to apples in each state. And so it is really interesting. I think sometimes you see a dip and a rebound because as the pricing differences over the tax structure become more apparent, people say, well, maybe it is more effective for us to be in the medical program.
Dr. Berry.
Thank you. So one of the things I have, unfortunately, 3 things I wanted to ask and say. One, you mentioned about compassionate equity. I think, like, if you're in a medical program and you're getting your access through a hybrid place, isn't there the risk that those who need it for medical reasons, you're competing with those who are taking it for recreational reasons, that they may not have it? Like, how do you assure that they get priority? Do they get access through a different line? So if they're taking it and it's effective for a medical reason, they're not having to shop around?
Yeah, and that's one of the things before businesses convert is we want to evaluate their plan to avoid that very problem you're describing. And so that's something we're going to take a close look at before we give them approval to convert, is how are they going to preserve the medical program. Also, the statute If the issue is an overall just insufficient supply for both markets, I have the authority to limit the amount of that can be sold per transaction. And so that would be available if what we're finding is we just have insufficient supply. So we've got to reduce how much, adult users can purchase per transaction to preserve. Also, there will be certain products that are only available to patients. And so certainly there will be some categories that will, where that competition won't even exist.
So this brings me back to, my recurrent theme about data and the opportunities to acquire it, because how would you, first of all, I feel like once you go into the recreational space, it makes the medical marijuana program somewhat redundant. And I'm so glad they mentioned about social equity, because there's so many barriers for those who are the least among us. And I happen to be now the interim director of a health disparity institute, so I'm glad I have the space to say this, is that, the $100 there, but please, like, if you wanted to get a medical clearance to get it, and you don't have health insurance and you don't have access to a doctor, those patients are not going to have the same access as the haves. And so I've always wondered about that. I'm glad you have a social equity, but I just would like to say the whole process should be equitable, not just the end point from that perspective. And I always feel like there's an opportunity lost if we didn't get data. I don't know how it would be stored, but are you going to require specific data from the commercial people to track? I think it's important to know if you're getting a consult, if there's, people who are taking it for recreational reasons, but it's really medical. We won't know that anymore.
Yeah, so I mean, the data challenges remain, and I think, we've discussed this at various meetings, kind of what they are. DCP does not have the staff to do that kind of data analytics. So we're certainly available as a resource for people who want to delve into that and work either with us or with the businesses, but we're just not staffed up with the skill set or the resources for that kind of stuff. As to your other point, I do think it's good. So the patient registration fee, that $100 is going away. So that'll be helpful. There's this sales tax will not be applied to patients who are buying medicine, whereas it would for adult users. So there will be a price difference there. But you're right, if patients choose to self-medicate essentially and not go through a doctor and through a pharmacist, it will be hard for us to track that. And I think one of the benefits of our program that hopefully patients will recognize is having that medical expertise and engagement in selecting products and monitoring how it interacts with symptoms or disease states.
And I'd like to just add a little bit to that. Part of the reason why we're very interested in maintaining pharmacists, even in the hybrid, was for that very opportunity. So hopefully, if a patient or a person that's purchasing cannabis from kind of the adult use market presents something to the person at the sale, that pharmacists could hopefully intervene and encourage that patient to consider the medical market and use the product kind of under more medical guidance and expertise.
Dr. Salmer?
I have four questions along the same lines, if I may. So from what I gather from what you're saying, Commissioner, the cost would be potentially roughly the same, other than the tax difference between the products, between the recreational market and the medical market?
I would think we'll have to see sort of how it plays out, but it will be, we're using the same standards in terms of, how it needs to be grown, how it needs to be tested, how it needs to be labeled. So
Okay.
The products could be in both spaces, putting aside the ones that are specific only to medical. So I anticipate the prices will probably be similar, if not the same, other than the sales tax.
Okay. And you answered my second question. The third one is, will the people who purchase recreationally be entered into the PMP?
No, so those sales won't be tracked
Okay, so
on that level, because yeah, at that point, it's not really being treated as medicine.
Yeah, okay. And the last question I had was, with the hybrids that are upcoming, ultimately, how many medical dispensaries do you think there will be?
Well, so right now we have the 18. I don't know how many of those will convert. You know, a lot of it may depend on kind of what their zoning situations are. I think we'll ultimately end up with a lot more hybrid than pure exclusive dispensaries. That would be my guess, but sort of, again, depending on how the market plays out, there may be some that find that there is really a niche to serve of patients only.
But there may be some new hybrids, so it could be more than 18.
Yeah, so we'll have the existing 18 either as dispensaries or hybrids. In addition, I believe we're going to add 4. Is that right, Rod? 4 hybrids, plus there may be some equity joint ventures that also are going to be, that also choose to be in that.
Okay.
Yes, 4 is correct.
Okay, so, and that's, you know, the initial thing. We did want to grow the program in a way that's manageable in all areas. So that would, you know, add 4 in that space, plus delivery services will become an option. So there will be, you know, increased methods for maybe people who either can't get to one or where the distance is too great.
I have a question. Good morning, Commissioner.
Morning.
Regarding potency in this hybrid market, how do we put a level on the amount of THC? What I'm hearing from other states that have gone recreational, there are exceedingly high levels of THC. So I want to know how this is going to be regulated in terms of the recreational market. And also, my other question is related again to the pharmacy, having a pharmacist in a hybrid model. How do they participate in this? Director Roderick mentioned something about having them involved in the recreational adult use. So I have concerns about patients who are going to transfer over to this adult use and not be regulated. And the last question is related to the tax structure. Obviously, the financial incentives to remaining a medical patient are great for people who know, like in other states, where we have 20% taxation on products as it is in Massachusetts. I was curious how we're going to structure that in Connecticut. And I think early on it was mentioned about in terms of potency that would factor into how much they're taxed. So I wonder if you could address some of those things.
So in terms of the THC potency, the statute itself places a cap on what THC levels can be in sort of adult use products. So there will be higher THC products in the medical program that won't be available in the adult use program. So that's the one feature. In terms of the role of the pharmacist, if somebody has really just pulled themselves out of the medical program, they wouldn't necessarily be consulting with a pharmacist. And I think that's something patients would lose if they choose to go that route. But one of the things we'll be looking at as we consider the medical preservation plans that are presented to us when these businesses decide to, or request to convert, is how do they plan to do that? How do they plan to ensure that patients who have remained patients continue to have that relationship? That there's the private room where they can consult, that, the requirements of entry into the PMP, all of that will remain the same. So for the patients, it'll be, we want to maintain as much the same type of program. And I think for some patients, especially who've been with the program for a while, there may be less and less consultation. They've sort of found what works well for them. And it's much more just like when you get a prescription renewed, after a few years, you kind of know what's working. And so for some, it may be more straightforward, but especially for newer patients or ones who are experiencing different symptoms or where something's not working for them anymore, having that pharmacist there. And we want to make sure before we give somebody permission to convert that they have a plan to maintain that benefit for patients.
I wonder along those lines if you could clarify something for me, because I have a very close relationship with the dispensary pharmacists in my area. And I was told that when I refer a patient that I was under the impression that they automatically had a consultation with a pharmacist, but I'm learning that some patients opt out of that option and they basically choose the products themselves. I wonder if you could clarify that for me, because I was under the perhaps false impression that the consultation was required when they're referred to have that experience rather than going directly to choosing these things on their own. And so, that is also my concern as we move forward to the recreational market, where if patients seem to know what they want, or they think they have an idea of what they want, they're going to move forward without working with a pharmacist.
That's certainly a risk. I don't think there's, we want our dispensaries to be offering that to patients. I don't think we have anything in our laws that would force a patient to do that. So if a patient just says, I don't want to meet with you, I'm good, we're not going to take away their registration card or things like that. It's certainly something we think is a good idea. And, we're glad the dispensaries are offering, but at the end of the day, patients, we're not going to force them into that meeting. Are there any other questions? All right. Certainly, if you think of things later, you know how to find us. But with that, I want to thank you, Dr. Sinha, for being with us, and I will turn it over to you so that you can sort of update the board on the research that you're doing.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Siegel. This meeting goes only till 9 a.m., right?
No, I think it can, I don't know that it has a set end date. Sorry, I hope you didn't have to leave at 9.
No, it's fine. I just wanted, if people have to leave, I can do a 2-3 minute summary. If we want a little bit longer, I can certainly show some slides, but I'm happy to just do a very brief summary. Is that what would make sense given the time? And whatever is required, please let me know.
I'll leave it to the panelists. These meetings often go for anywhere from 1 to 2 hours.
I have till at least 9:30. So.
Okay, all right.
Me too.
Well, then I will show some slides and try to still be brief. Do I have share capability?
Yes, you do. If you just see right at the bottom, you should have a square with the arrow.
Yep, I will do that. Thank you. Do you all see my screen now? Okay, and you can hear me. So we
maybe you might want to just minimize us. There we go. Okay.
Are we good? Okay, so we wanted to do research as you all, as the state went ahead and passed the medical marijuana law. This is really just background. You all know this. It was really rather unique and rare that the state was very focused on the fact that we don't know enough about cannabis's beneficial effects versus some of its less beneficial effects, and that we needed to understand it more. Just a history here, the MMRP was established in 2016, administered under DCP, and at Yale, we started doing some of the work. Dr. Horvath, who's a collaborator of mine, a basic scientist, did a brought Connecticut Pharmaceutical Solutions, which became CT Pharma, and they are our commercial partner here. We discussed things with them and were very interested in assessing what type of potency, what dose, and what compound would actually help with emotional and physical pain for chronic pain, other illnesses, and opioid use disorder. We started discussions with our Yale Human Research Protection Program, the Yale General Counsel, because of course we wanted to use product available here at the state, and that's not allowed federally. So we ran right into the federal state conflict. HRPP at Yale was very supportive, but wanted to speak with DCP, and there was discussion between them. And I have to really give a shout out to DCP here, Commissioner Siegel, Director Roderick, and others who have hung in there with us as we did this work and started this work and went through all the hoops. Yale HRPP basically said that we would only be allowed if we did get FDA approval, and that was some trepidation there because we were going into the federal waters. However, the FDA CDER division was actually quite open to considering our protocol. They were not interested in doing a clinical trial. We started very small. We said we would look at safety and dose determination. Acute single doses was our first study, which I'll show you. Our second study is hopefully ready to begin soon. And based on interest, after a lot of back and forth and evaluating the safety of the product, and CT Pharma was amazing in terms of providing all of the certificates of analysis and all of the descriptions and quantitative compositions. There was a very detailed analysis assessment done by the FDA. They looked at inclusion, exclusion, and we were able to get approval for both studies and have continued to be under FDA guidance for this protocol. Then we, of course, had to deal with the DEA, and they rejected it based on federal regulations. However, our Connecticut DEA specialists were very helpful. We consulted with them. We started to match our protocol to match state law and remove the word prescription. So this is interesting given the discussion you all were having. Physician prescribing could not be in there. And we went with this written certification language and self-administration, and we modified protocol along those lines. And this went on for another year or so. So we've now, we registered potential subjects as state guidance and DCP guidance. Really have partnered with the DCP in making sure we were following all the guidelines and regulations, and their support has been really amazing and fantastic. So we did a single dose administration of placebo versus 5 other doses of combinations, 2 CBD and 3 combination doses over 6 separate sessions. We started this as an inpatient option. This is going through COVID as well, and moved it out of outpatient to start off. We wanted to look at the best dose versus placebo, looked at PK/PD, side effects, and response to pain and stress acutely. And we enrolled actually 10 individuals, 2 who were not able to complete it because they were stuck between the inpatient and outpatient and changed their minds. But then we have 8 outpatient folks. You see their specifics, their demographics, and how much their daily use of cannabis was. These were recreational cannabis users, moderate to heavy users. And let me just go right into, I know time is short and you all may have questions. Let me show you some plasma levels of THC and CBD. These are just so you can understand the graphs here. This is placebo. This is CBD 100, 40, CBD 10, THC 40, 20, and 130. And this is the time points over, really over 4.5 hours. And you would see essentially that the THC levels are going up in the THC conditions, just as you would expect. There are some differences that look better in this chart, which I will show you here, which is the average levels. and you see levels going up as you would expect for THC right here in the THC conditions, and for CBD right there. This is really interesting story here that is building out. This is again from a separation from baseline. So we wanted to correct what their basal levels were. And you see, of course, CBD 100 doing well here in terms of levels, and CBD 40-10, but not 40-20. And when we look at blood pressure, and these are average blood pressures minus baseline, really there's no effects, not much significant. There's reductions actually in blood pressure with CBD, and a little bit of an increase here in diastolic blood pressure. Average pulse rate went up with THC, which is expected. It's equivalent across all the doses, and we were not surprised by that, but not a whole lot. Average pain, this is over the entire 4-hour period. You had reports of, this is repeated pain assessments, pain going down. Not a whole lot in terms of, so again, these are recreational users. They don't have chronic pain, but you do see a difference from placebo for most of the doses. And some reductions, and not a whole lot of change in anxiety there, some significance of increase in anxiety. When we correct that, we see that actually the anxiety was really basally related, and pain is very much, so when we say, this is actually pain under acute cold pressor test. So this is acute provocation conditions. And when we do that and correct for a control condition, so this is experimentally induced pain, the data really clean up very well and give us an indication of where the target is, that in fact combinations and specific dosing matters. Unlike what patients may tell you, they can take any THC and their pain gets better. Actually, we see that would not be true. And for anxiety, it's really the higher CBD THC doses. So really, in summary, we have positive results. There were no drug-related adverse events. This is, of course, with single administration of each dose. Vital signs were pretty normal. No significant craving. I haven't shown you that data, but they didn't want more drug. This is with an oral tablet, so that's another discussion point. We can certainly get into it. Very small increases in feeling high with THC doses. 40, 10, and 130 seem to be better for pain and anxiety than anything else. The 2-to-1 was not effective. And so we're ready to begin our second study, which would enroll patients with chronic pain, 3 groups of patients, those with musculoskeletal pain, MS, or opioid use disorder. We've chosen 2 best doses. They'll be taking the dose for 7 days. We're still going to get blood levels. They will still have pain provocation, daily pain stress ratings, and levels at later as well. So that's a very quick rundown. I'm not sure if people have questions. I'm happy to go into some more details if there are questions. And I can stop sharing. Yes, Dr. Salma.
Dr. Sinha, quick question. I noticed that there's THC levels measured in your placebo group.
Yes.
So is that somebody who's had their own use of
That's
THC?
right. That's right. So we were advised, and in fact, the FDA required that we use recreational cannabis users for study 1. And as you may know, cannabis hangs around in the system for quite a while, and we had the rule that people needed to not have used, not be cannabis, and come in under intoxication conditions. We assessed that through self-report. However, they could have used prior to 24 hours.
But doesn't that sort of add difficulty in assessing results if the placebo group already has THC present in their system?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, you know, there are those, so this is a really important point, because as you may know, you have patients coming in, going to the dispensary, getting their cannabis. There are studies where people are looking at carefully assessing pain and stress. And the question is, is it ameliorating their pain, and is it going away fully, right? And what of the tolerance effects? So your question has gone right to the heart of the matter. And from a safety perspective, of course, FDA asked us to make sure we are using folks who have exposure to cannabis in this early safety phase, and that made sense. And of course, we were going to follow their guidance. But the question really is that, you know, once these medicines get developed, we will not have the luxury of saying, well, you can't be somebody who's a user or not user, right? So in some ways, we really want to be able to say, is it taking away their pain? And what's the medicine? You know, when you start to think about medical use and a treatment, you really want to go above and beyond what people are assuming is it's doing for them. So that's, you know, you raise a good point, and that's where we were based on regulations, and we needed to have that. And that's why the change score, I think, is really critical. So you saw this more widespread sort of saying, oh, I have less pain overall over the 4 hours. However, the provocation, experimental provocation, was very critical. This is a more, I didn't go into the details, but a more detailed provocation procedure that we've developed and adapted. We have very nice stress biological measure activation here with this provocation. And so we can start to really assess whether there is acute pain amelioration happening and at what doses.
I have a question. How did you establish the doses that you were given? And I understand this was a spray. So what was the frequency of the dosing to establish the plasma levels that you have? And the other question I have along the lines of Dr. Sellner, you know, most of our patients have had no experience with cannabis, and the recommendation has always been start low and start slow. In fact,
yeah.
Micro dosing. And I think that, you know, I don't know if there's any future studies that are planning to look at novel patients.
Well, the hope would be that we could do novel patients. As you know, this was a safety study, and so we wanted to see how the acute doses will be. The second study is also safety in patients. But let me just clarify it, because I ran through this quickly. We started with thinking of planning to do oral spray, but that was changed to a tablet. So all the studies are being done with an oral tablet that has facilitative GI absorption technology developed with technology that facilitates GI absorption. And I don't know if you could see, I ran through the slides quickly, but because this is going through the gut, you do see a much slower rise in the levels of THC and CBD, and I think that's actually really good. That's something that we are quite interested in, and we're going to be looking at that more carefully with the multiple dosing study, multiple daily doses. So that's number one. The second thing I think is a really good point about individuals taking this as medicine and not necessarily being users. As our safety continues to develop and get validated, particularly around the issue of abuse liability and feelings of high and those kinds of things, I think that will really inform its broader utility.
Nice work, Rajita. I just wanted to, I wanted to mention that we had done a study a few years ago at the VA, a double-blind placebo-controlled study looking at 5 different kinds of pain, cold, heat, chemical, injected capsaicin. And we didn't find any effect with just THC, and perhaps we need that combination. But I wanted to mention, Mitch asked a question about other studies. So we're going to be starting a large multi-center VA study involving almost 300 patients comparing THC, CBD, and the combination of THC and CBD to placebo in patients with chronic neuropathic pain. Hopefully, with that sample size, we'll be able to address a number of these issues about efficacy and safety. And curiously, the FDA did not require that we include people who are currently using marijuana. that wasn't a requirement of from the FDA. So I suppose the FDA varies considerably in what it requires across different studies.
Will you have a dose escalation, Cyril, in terms of?
Yeah. I mean, that was one, someone mentioned earlier, low and slow. There'll be a 2-week dose escalation to get people who are, naive or not used to it, get them to a place where they might be much more tolerant of it. Yeah.
Cyril, what's the dose? Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, what's your combination dose?
The combination is a 1-to-1 CBD THC ratio, and that's it's a nabiximols. That's not yet available in the States, but is oromucosal spray. Yeah, so that's what I would be using.
Thanks.
Cyril, I'm curious how you were able to do a VA study being a federal program. How did you go ahead and get permission? I have colleagues who are in the VA system who are very much want to do studies, but because of the federal regulations, they're unable to do that.
Well, I've been at the VA now. This July was 30 years, and I've been doing research on cannabinoids for 25 years of this. So it's possible to do it. The VA used to be somewhat, cautious about this, but I think that in the last 5 years or so, responding to what's happening in the real world, as in veterans are, seeking out marijuana, the VA decided that they needed to do the kind of study that would inform clinicians and VA health experts about whether there is or is not a role for cannabinoids in the treatment of medical conditions. And after a long deliberation, the experts decided that the one target for which there was some evidence, but really needed to be more definitive, is chronic neuropathic pain. So the target in the study are people who have diabetes, who have chronic neuropathic pain, and it's it's going to be the largest study, to my knowledge, double-blind placebo-controlled study. So we should hopefully have good information in a couple of years about whether it works or doesn't work and what the safety is like.
Well, I definitely want to stay in touch with you regarding this and put you in touch with one of my colleagues who's at the Los Angeles VA system. So,
sounds good. Thanks.
Great.
Dr. Berry?
I just want to say thank you. That was a great presentation. It's interesting because when we do these controlled studies, we try and mirror the real world as much as possible, but and I'm just throwing out things that you may not have the answer to, but like the confounding factors, right? Because when people have pain, they're not often just taking one thing. How are you addressing that? In particular, what I've always been curious about, any other medication, you have to have a side effects and a interaction profile. And we haven't done that with cannabis to know,
right?
So does everyone in your study have to be only taking cannabis, in terms of potential interactions to know how they are? And also lastly, it's interesting that you're using an oral pill, because I think, depending on your pain profile, a lot of people don't want to wait 20, whatever amount of minutes it takes to get it, if you can have another route that will have a quicker absorption. So I just wanted to know if you're looking at other routes of administration and see that impact. Sorry, so 2 questions or 3 in there. Somehow you figure it out.
Those are great questions, Dr. Berry. Thank you for asking. So the first study was recreational users. They didn't have pain. The study we are starting now will be chronic pain patients, and we are not requiring them to be active cannabis users. They should have had some exposure to it. The requirement, so we are going to be looking at interactions very carefully. There's certain medications they cannot be on. And I'm sure Dr. Cyril also can run through his criteria, because he's going to do the largest study. They can be taking some pain meds, but most importantly, their pain could cannot have been addressed fully by the meds. So they still need, have chronic pain. And that will be assessed in a number of ways. But the point you're making is so important, which is that the reason why we need research, because we don't know about the interactions, and that is really critical. And a lot of this kind of research, both early stage as well as phase 2, phase 3 trials, larger trials, is going to provide a lot of information to the FDA. And the FDA is actually really interested and open and wanting to hear about this, because they know what's coming. They see this and what's already here, most likely. To your point about waiting 20 to 30 minutes is an interesting point, because at this point, we don't see a need for titration in the doses that we are going to be testing for chronic pain. And so I do think that once they get started daily, they're going to maintain levels based on what we are seeing from the levels, even from study 1. So yes, if 20 minutes, if someone wants an effect in 20 minutes, smoking it obviously will do it. But there's a bigger interest, I think, for folks who are looking for sustained, amelioration of their symptoms. So we'll see that, but that's essentially, we went with the tablet because we wanted more people to feel like they have access to the medicine.
I'm sorry, just to follow up. I think one of the other issues is that, we assume chronic pain syndrome is kind of equal. We assess it on the same kind of scale as if it's one size fits all, whereas sometimes it is like transitory. There will be moments when it can be really acute. And so we're not really assessing the spectrum of how pain is presenting per se. We just kind of say, well, what is your level at the time we're assessing? And so I think that's sometimes what dictates how people use these medications, whether or not they can wait, to take it in the different routes. And the other thing that I find interesting is that, the people who are helping to guide patients to take cannabis are pharmacists, which is not what we do in medicine. It's normally the doctor who's engaged in helping to manage the patient. So I think having an understanding of the absorption and all that would be very beneficial to physicians as they're looking at this. And sorry, the last thing is, so I know you said they were all taking it recreational, but that doesn't mean they don't have comorbidities in that group. Did you, have some elimination criteria in that context?
Yes, they could not. They needed to be healthy. So if they had other medical conditions, they were not selected for the safety study. So they were healthy, young users mostly. You saw that from the age. To your point about the 20 minutes versus both pain levels and wanting the effect quickly. I mean, we all know that when you get smoked cannabis, you get the effect quickly, but it goes down pretty quickly. And that's part of its, major feature of that. And the question, I think, is still an open question of whether that is medicinal in its effect, right? We know that steady state levels are an important aspect. So those also went into our decision of how we were, formulation of what we wanted to be testing. And then finally, I just want to say about your pain point, you're so right about pain going up and down based on what is happening. And one of the things that we do in research is we are now really in the daily mode of assessing pain at multiple times during the day. So of course it's not continuous. We don't have a passive biomonitoring kind of system for pain. But on the other hand, we can do multiple times a day. And that comes close to sort of seeing what is the cycle of pain for people, what's the context in which it happens, and how quickly do they start looking for relief, and what's their go-to first. So we learn a lot more, I think, and there are studies like that going on just to understand sort of the the whole pathophysiology of chronic pain. Yeah.
Thank you.
Dr. Sinha, I have one question. Since your study involved daily long-term users of marijuana, I was wondering if you encountered the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. I know it's rare, but we see this in chronic long-term users. And was that something that your study was observing during the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. We did not need them to be chronic long-term users. In fact, cannabis use disorder, severe cannabis use disorder was an exclusion because they needed to be recreational users. So I don't think we had chronic users per se. They were regular users. And we were trying to keep it very much to those. There were some who did meet mild criteria for cannabis use disorder. And we did not so far encounter hyperemesis. Yes, Dr. Salma.
Dr. Sinha, it's estimated that 25 or 30% of patients will have pharmacogenomic differences which render cannabinoids less impactful because of metabolic differences. Are you doing any pharmacogenomic assessment of the patients on your study?
That's a great question. At this point, these are such small studies that we have not included that. Our goal is to include those aspects to understand who it works for, who it doesn't. And the genetics is a very important component of it. Our hope is that we're going to head there very quickly as soon as, in fact, we, you know, a number of other groups, stakeholders are very interested in this work. It has just been very hard and CT Pharma has been a great collaborator. We are using state and local product, which is the one thing I just want to underscore. But it's still challenging. There's just a lot of things happening in the commercial market that impacts us when we're doing that kind of partnership. So
Right.
my hope is I wish we could go sooner and we could get to those questions, but we're not there yet.
Thank you.
Perhaps Dr. D'Souza is going to be doing genetic analysis. He's got a large study going, so that may be.
Yeah, so we are collecting DNA on everyone, and hopefully we will look at, you know, not just genomic, not just PK relevant genomics, but also, for example, you know, genes that may be related to pain, such as and stress, like the gene for the fatty acid amide hydrolase, and things like that. Yeah, so we will be looking at it.
Yeah, and Dr. Salma, to your point, you know, other studies, and we saw this in ours, even in our small study, and I'm sure Cyril has seen this, there's a lot of variability in levels. It's very interesting. So even when you control for things, you account for basal levels, there is variability. And so there are going to be those aspects that's going to be important.
Thank you.
Dr. Sinha, is your presentation available for us to review, either a PDF format?
Not as of yet, but I'm happy to share it.
Great.
Once you have it available, you can send it to me and I'll forward it to the board.
Okay. Sure.
I know some people said they need to leave around 9:30, but if we have more questions, I can certainly stay around longer. And if you can, Dr. Sinha, you know, for those who are available.
I'm happy to. Dr. Zemsky, did you have a question?
No, I was saying that was a great talk, but I need to run. So, but thank you very much.
Thanks, Rajita. I got it run.
Okay.
Thanks, Cyril. Good to see you.
So I think probably while we technically still have a quorum, we should maybe do a move to adjourn.
So moved.
But I don't know if though people do want to continue if all of us are going to stay on, and there's more questions, I guess we can continue that. Or we may be wrapping up anyways. Okay. Well, thank you, doctor. That was great. I think it's really an important part of the medical is to remind people we've got some rigorous research happening out there. So we have the motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor? All right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all, and thank you. And yeah, as soon as that presentation is available, we will, you know, you send it over to us, and we'll get it. Make sure all the board members get it, and including those who unfortunately weren't able to make today's meeting. I think they'll be interested as well.
Great.
Do we know when another meeting is scheduled?
We don't have one on the books yet. We may see. And we'll need to, you know, I want to make sure we keep these being useful. So I want to, if we don't have petitions, make sure we have other important kind of substance for the meeting. But I think like in the past, we will kind of reach out to get dates from people.
Perhaps once the adult market goes into effect, we could have another session as an update.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. We'll certainly want to update you right around either when that happens or shortly after, so that you can kind of hear how that's going. And if there's other topics, you don't have to discuss now, but if you want to let, you can reach out to any of us if you have other things that you want us to be sure to include on a agenda.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Take care.
Have
Thank
a
you.
good rest of your day.
Have a
Yeah.
good summer.
Try
Yes,
not to get
thank
too
you.
hot out there.
Stay cool.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.